Picture Manhattan today, 8 million people, skyscrapers that vanish into clouds, a subway system running beneath your feet every minute of every day. Now picture this instead. A muddy point of land at the tip of an island ringed by forest, a handful of wooden houses, a windmill turning slowly in the harbour breeze, pigs wandering through unpaved streets, and a population so small that everyone, and I mean everyone, knows everyone else's business. That was New York in the 1600s. Except it wasn't called New York yet. It was called New Amsterdam. Using advanced AI technology, we've taken the handful of surviving maps, paintings, and engravings from this almost forgotten chapter of the city's history and brought them back to life, recreating the streets, the harbour, and the people who walked them nearly 4 centuries ago. What you're about to see is the city before it was a city, the seed from which the largest metropolis in America would eventually grow. Let's step into 17th century Manhattan. Our story begins not with ambition, but with business. In the early 1600s, the Dutch East India Company sent an English explorer named Henry Hudson to find a shortcut to Asia. He failed, but what he found instead? A deep, sheltered river leading into a vast natural harbour was, in its own way, just as valuable. Within a few years, Dutch merchants were sailing into this harbour to trade with the Lenape people who had lived on this land for thousands of years. Beaver pelts, in particular, were worth a fortune back in Europe, where they were turned into the broad-brimmed felt hats that every fashionable gentleman wanted. By 1625, the Dutch West India Company decided this trading post needed to become something more permanent. They sent settlers, they built a fort, and they gave their new outpost a name, New Amsterdam. It would remain Dutch for less than 40 years. But in that short window, the foundations of modern New York, its street grid, its harbour, even its obsession with money, were already being laid down. This is Fort Amsterdam, and in the 1620s and 30s, it was, quite simply, the entire reason the colony existed. Built at the very southern tip of Manhattan, roughly where Battery Park stands today. The fort was a rough earthwork structure with 4 bastions, designed to protect the harbour entrance from rival European powers. Inside its walls stood a barracks, a warehouse for furs and trade goods, and the home of the colony's governor. Notice how small it actually is. This isn't a grand European fortress. It's a defensive box thrown up quickly by a trading company more concerned with profit than permanence. The walls were originally just packed earth and timber, and within a decade, they were already falling apart from neglect, much to the frustration of the company back in Holland. Everything in New Amsterdam radiated outward from this point. The first houses, the first church, the first dock. If you wanted to understand the entire colony in the 1630s, you could stand at this fort and see almost all of it. Today, nothing of the fort survives. The site is buried beneath the financial district, but the street pattern around Bowling Green still echoes the shape of the world that grew up in its shadow. This is one of the most surprising things most people never learn about early New York. It had a canal. The Dutch, true to form, dug a waterway running inland from the harbour along what is now Broad Street. They called it the Heer Gracht, the Gentleman's Canal, named after a famous canal back in Amsterdam. Small boats could sail directly into the heart of the settlement to unload goods. Wooden bridges crossed it at intervals. Houses with the distinctive stepped gables of Dutch architecture lined its banks, their reflections sitting in the still water. But this being a brand new colony on the edge of a wilderness, the canal quickly became something else too, a dumping ground. Waste, animal carcasses, and refuse from nearby tanneries turned the water foul within years. By the 1670s, under English rule, the canal would be filled in entirely and paved over. If you've ever walked down Broad Street in the financial district, you've walked along the buried route of Manhattan's only canal. The street is unusually wide for Lower Manhattan, and now you know why. And speaking of streets with secret histories, this is the wall that gave Wall Street its name. In 1653, With England and the Netherlands at war and rumours swirling of an attack from New England colonists to the north, Director General Peter Stuyvesant ordered the construction of a defensive wall across the width of Manhattan Island, roughly along the line of modern Wall Street. It was not, by any stretch, an impressive structure. Mostly wooden palisades and earthworks, about 12 feet high, manned by a handful of soldiers and enslaved labourers who were forced to do much of the construction work. The wall never saw combat. The attack it was built to repel never came. And when the English finally did take the colony in 1664, they simply sailed past it and demanded surrender at the fort. By the 1690s, the wall was torn down, its timber repurposed, its earth leveled. But the street that ran alongside it kept the name. 3 centuries later, that name would become synonymous with global finance itself. A defensive line built in panic against an attack that never happened became the most famous address in the financial world. Look toward the harbour in almost any image of 17th century New Amsterdam, and you'll spot something unmistakably Dutch: windmills. These weren't decorative. They were essential machinery, grinding grain into flour, sawing timber for construction, and in some cases pumping water, just as they did back in the Netherlands. The largest stood near the fort, its sails visible to every ship entering the harbour, a small piece of home transplanted across the Atlantic. The waterfront itself was a chaotic, working space. Small Dutch trading vessels called floats rode at anchor, enslaved Africans, brought to the colony by the Dutch West India Company from its earliest years, loaded and unloaded cargo along makeshift docks. Free black New Amsterdammers, a small but real part of the population, owned land and worked trades just outside the main settlement. This is a detail that often gets lost in the romantic image of quaint old Dutch New York. Slavery was woven into the colony's economy from the very beginning, and the labor of enslaved people built much of what travelers saw when they sailed into the harbor. A mile or so north of the fort, the dense little town gave way abruptly to farmland, what the Dutch called a Bowery. The most famous of these belonged to Peter Stuyvesant himself, the colony's last and most formidable Dutch governor. After New Amsterdam fell to the English in 1664, Stuyvesant retired to this very farm and lived out the rest of his life there, a Dutchman growing old in a city that now flew an English flag. The road that connected his farm to the town followed an old Lenape trail. The Dutch called it simply de Bowery Lane. Today, that road is the Bowery, one of Manhattan's oldest continuously used streets, its name a direct, unbroken echo of a 17th century Dutch farm road, still carrying traffic 400 years later. We end where the Dutch chapter effectively ends, at the fort in the late summer of 1664. An English fleet sails into the harbour, 4 warships carrying soldiers under the command of Richard Nichols. Stuyvesant, ever the soldier, wants to fight. He orders the fort's cannons readied, but the colonists themselves, Dutch merchants who had spent decades building businesses and families here, have no appetite for a siege they cannot win. A petition, signed by nearly 100 residents, urges Stuyvesant to surrender peacefully. He does. Without a single shot fired, New Amsterdam becomes New York, renamed in honor of the Duke of York, brother of England's king. And here is the detail that surprises people most. Almost nothing changes overnight. The Dutch residents stay. Dutch continues to be spoken in homes and churches for generations. The street layout, that canal, that wall, those crooked lanes radiating from the old fort, remains essentially untouched. The English changed the flag and the name, but the bones of the city, the bones you can still trace on a map of Lower Manhattan today, were Dutch. So there it is, the city before the city. A muddy trading post at the edge of an unmapped continent, built by a company chasing profit, defended by a wall that never held, and crossed by a canal that no longer exists. And yet walk through Lower Manhattan today, down Broad Street, along Wall Street, up the Bowery, and you are tracing, almost exactly, the footsteps of people who lived here in the 1600s. If you enjoyed this look back at the world's first global city before it was global, let us know in the comments which city you'd like to see brought back to life next. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the past.